2025 legislative session is underway here in Annapolis. Lawmakers focusing in on some of the biggest issues facing Maryland, from the budget and energy.
In addition to a budget crisis, we have an energy crisis in Maryland.
To juvenile crime.
We need to have a greater measurement of accountability for juveniles that break the law.
And everything in between. I'm going in depth on the legislative priorities and holding lawmakers accountable. We're live in Annapolis, where the 2025 legislative session is officially underway. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost. Lawmakers have a lot to tackle over the next 90 days, from juvenile crime concerns to energy policy to the multi-billion-dollar budget deficit. We've heard from several state leaders, including Governor Wes Moore, about what's on the agenda this session and how they plan to address the looming budget crisis.
Happy opening day.
As this year's legislative session gets underway, the $3 billion budget deficit looms over lawmakers. Governor Wes Moore calling for $2 billion in spending cuts. But where that's coming from remains a question.
It's going to take everybody being at the table to be able to address a structural deficit.
Senate President Bill Ferguson. Where in the budget is there room to make these cuts, and where will the additional $1 billion come from?
I mean, look, we have a $63 billion budget. In fact, the budget that we're in right now is $1 billion less than the one from the prior year. In a $63 billion budget, there's room to make adjustments. And every year we find places to trim and cut. This is going to be a year where we have significantly bigger cuts at stake. And so, everything is on the table.
While Republicans argue they are not supporting any new tax or fee increases.
Marylanders are having to live within their means, and the state of Maryland has to do the same.
But the budget isn't the only issue some lawmakers are eyeing this session.
In addition to a budget crisis, we have an energy crisis in Maryland.
Maryland's energy needs thrust into the spotlight last year as the fight against a 70-mile transmission line proposed to cut through Baltimore, Frederick, and Carroll counties. As that proposal unfolds, concerns about Maryland's own energy generation remain. And Republicans and Democrats agree.
I think this year, for the first time in a long time, Marylanders across our state are looking at our energy policies.
A lot of the issues around energy are more about approvals and permitting and siting and encouraging the development with multiple different sources of energy. This is about setting state policy that enables certainty in development of further energy generation.
When Governor Wes Moore first got into office, he pushed for widespread climate solution plans. Some of those ideas coming with $1 billion price tag. Those proposals did not come with funding sources. And now, given the deficit, Governor Moore acknowledging some plans may need to be paused.
I think about some environmental work, things I believe in deeply, but I also know this. We have a new incoming federal administration that is not going to support that work. It's not going to leverage that capital.
This session, the legislative leadership seemed to agree. Making Maryland affordable is key.
If our focus has got to be economic growth and making it easier for working class Marylanders, middle class Marylanders, who right now are feeling a financial squeeze and a financial pinch, and we've got to be able to make sure there are policies that's just making life more affordable.
The crushing cost of living burden on Marylanders is really an epidemic now in our state.
And now for the 90-day session, all eyes will be on how lawmakers find solutions for the budget concerns at the state and local levels. Joining us now live to talk about all of those issues is Senate President Bill Ferguson. Everything is underway, and the big topic, obviously, is the budget.
Yes.
We know the governor is talking about, proposing $2 billion in some spending cuts. That leaves about $1 billion left. Last year, we saw some targeted fee and tax increases. Is that what we will expect to see this year to make up the difference for the budget deficit?
First and foremost, I think we have to make sure that we're trying to live within our means. We've seen some unexpected increases in entitlement programs that are largely driven by healthcare costs. So folks who were coming to the hospital, costs are coming in way higher than anticipated in programs like Medicaid. We're also seeing costs go up for our incarcerated healthcare programs. You add that on top of things like our child care subsidy, which is a program that came in over budget, but it means that people are using it to go to work and send their kids to child care. All of these are entitlements. They're not about mismanagement or overspending. It's just a matter of if you're qualified, the program is available. And so That is the driving challenge, as well as the uncertainty that's going to come with the new federal administration, where we know Maryland is hugely reliant on federal dollars and the federal workforce. So we have some enormous challenges. We got to focus first on making sure that programs are meeting expectations and are within budget. We will make the cuts that are necessary. These are going to be hard choices for important programs, but we're also going to protect our values. So it's going to be a balanced approach.
When it comes to the programs that are coming in over budget, who's responsible for those projections that are not seemingly accurate?
It's a combination of executive and legislative analysts, but it is an abnormal time post-pandemic. We are seeing the length of stay for people who are showing up to the hospital extended, and we're seeing the procedures that they need are much more than we've really ever seen. We're also seeing a lot more end-of-life care on Medicaid, which is the most expensive period for anybody's medical care. And so, it's happening across the country, but it's acute in Maryland.
When you talk about the entitlement programs, we've heard that, these projections have been inaccurate or they're coming in over budget. There's any sort of responsibility on the Democrats who've had control from both chambers for several years for implementing some of these programs that didn't always have funding mechanisms?
So most of the times when the projections are off, it's because there's a huge swing in enrollment one direction or another. You see a huge jump in the number of eligible individuals. What's different about this go-round is that it's not a product of more people being qualified. It's that the services that are being performed in hospitals and in healthcare settings are much more extensive and are just higher cost, and people are staying in the hospital longer. There's a theory out there that because of during the pandemic people delayed care.
Sure.
Now 3 years later, when they're showing up for care, they're just sicker and they need more care. And so that's sort of the hypothesis, but it is an abnormal jump and we're not the only state experiencing this. We just are experiencing it acutely.
But what about other programs, not entitlement programs, that don't have funding sources? And Republicans will say this is Democrats spending without being checked.
Yeah, I mean, look, the child care subsidy program, we made some very intentional choices to help people get back to work. During the pandemic, we saw a record number of child care facilities closing. And we knew that in order to get our economy kicking back to full gear, we needed to provide a subsidy to families so that they could send their children back to child care settings. So it came in over budget because more people were using it than anticipated. That's, in my mind, not a bad thing because it means people are going back to work and able to put their child into a high-quality setting. Now we have to pay for it. And so I think that's the question that we're dealing with, and we have to balance in other places.
When it comes to the energy needs in the state, I want to get to juvenile crime in 1 second, but we've heard that energy policies need to be a conversation this year as well. What policies can be adjusted to spur more production in the state of Maryland? Yeah,
we're in a unique moment with the rise of AI and data centers. This huge demand and electrification on the grid is increasing enormously, a national issue. We also in Maryland are seeing the transition away from high carbon production like coal. So what we need to do is find better ways, more efficient ways to expand energy generation across the board: solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, and natural gas, and nuclear. And so we are what we have to do is make it easier in Maryland to get these projects off the ground and operating so that we can have domestic Maryland-made electricity to lower prices overall.
I know that there isn't the appetite to make adjustments to the juvenile justice laws, especially coming off of last year. A lot of the policies just took effect in November, but we continue to see some high-profile incidents. We have a man in Baltimore City. He was attacked. He has, permanent eyesight damage. What more can you do to ensure that these instances don't continue to happen and that the parents and the young people know that they will be held accountable for these actions?
Well, I don't think anybody is satisfied to say that we are where we need to be when it comes to both accountability and restoration for young people and their families and communities. But we are seeing some initial signs of progress. And the key is last year we were able to provide additional tools to law enforcement, to the Department of Juvenile Services, to educational entities. Now we have to see those tools used with fidelity. And so we'll be using the budget process this year to hold oversight of the agencies involved. We're going to further encourage better coordination and collaboration so that one hand is talking to the other. Because at the end of the day, we can pass all the laws in the world, but if they're not being executed on appropriately and effectively, it doesn't matter. And so we're at the stage now where we have to see it implemented well so that we can make sure that both kids are getting the service they need to not commit crimes, and communities feel safe and secure, and that we are in a place where there is accountability when the law is broken.
Quickly, is that a leadership problem at DJS?
I think it's a coordinated issue. You know, I think it's not one person, it's a system, and we have to hold all parts of the system accountable.
All right, Senate President Bill Ferguson, I appreciate your time today. Looking forward to continuing this for the next 89 days.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us. Senate Minority Leader Steve Hershey will join us after the break to talk about the Republican perspective. And as we head to break, here's another look at today's top headlines.
This was a powerful letter that was sent out last night and is now being made public. In it, Berardi is listing out specific solutions that he thinks will help curb crime in the city, specifically juvenile crime. Of course, it has been an issue that local and state leaders, they've been debating for quite some time now. Berardi starting his letter off by sharing his own personal story with the governor. Surveillance video here shows him walking home holding a pizza when a group of suspected juveniles steal his food, then senselessly hit him over the head with a metal pole. Not only does he want new leadership within DJS, he wants judges and prosecutors to have a say over detention decisions. He says he's already contacted several local agencies about his concerns, but he believes that the governor holds the power to create immediate change.
The governor is the one that's over all of these organizations. And I don't know if he's aware of these issues, and I want to make him aware of them and understand what his thoughts are on this and how he can help address this. But he's the only one that could pull all this together.
Resolutions making their way through the House and the Senate to cap the number of years one can spend in Congress.
We have it on the president. We have it on most of the governors in the states. A lot of state legislatures have it. It's time for it on Congress. The public knows. It's just the one thing that they can't get over is they're unwilling to give up that power and that self-interest.
The Senate is like an assisted living facility.
The new Congress is the third oldest on record, and the new Senate is the oldest to ever serve.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. If you're just joining us, we're live in Annapolis for the start of this year's legislative session. State leaders and lawmakers are up against a nearly $3 billion budget deficit, and opinions are mixed about how to tackle it. Senate Minority Leader Steve Hershey is joining us live now to talk about all of these. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about the budget. We just heard from the Senate President talk about ways that they are going to look at areas to potentially make up the difference. We know the governor is proposing $2 billion in spending cuts. How did we get here in the first place?
How did we get here? Well, it's through years of Democrat rule in General Assembly. And it was interesting yesterday because Governor Moore was out talking about inheriting this problem. Well, he inherited it from President Ferguson and Speaker Jones. You know, Governor Hogan did an excellent job with respect to the budget. The policies that we are talking about right now that have cost us a lot of money, that have put us in this position, many of them were vetoed by Governor Hogan, overridden by the Democrat General Assembly, and now we're having to pay the price for it. So, you know, this is a self-inflicted wound. We are very much aware of what was going on. We have discussed and we have fought against many of the entitlement programs that are going on, many of the spending programs that are out there, and fell on deaf ears, and all of a sudden we're at the time where we have to pay the piper.
When it comes to the entitlement programs, the Senate President says that a lot of this is coming from programs that are coming in over budget, inaccurate projections. Do you believe that that's the case?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I think that there has been some mismanagement. You know, Department of Health has had some numbers come in that were way out of line with what they had expected. At the same time, we put policies in place that cost money. And we had talked about those before when these bills came about. And, you know, there always had seemed to be a problem that money wasn't the issue. I mean, we can easily talk about the blueprint. And that's something that we had talked about before was an unfunded mandate, yet that comes across. All of a sudden, it comes time to pay for it and the money's not available. So these are things that should not be a surprise to anybody. But how we got here and why and how we're going to get out is going to take a lot of work.
When it comes to taking a lot of work, we're expecting to see the governor propose his budget next week, get a better idea of where some of these cuts are going to come from. But that still leaves $1 billion left for you guys to figure out where that's coming from. Do you think that new taxes and fees are on the table? I mean, we're hearing everything is on the table. What will that mean?
Well, there's been quite a change from there's been a high bar before we raise taxes to everything's on the table, which means tax increases are on the table. From the Republican caucus perspective, absolutely not. We will not support any type of tax or fee increases at all, period, end of story. So we're going to focus on cuts.
But you don't have the votes to block that if they want to do it.
You know, Mikenzie, we don't have the votes all the time, but we can make a difference in committee hearings and on the floor, and we can hold them accountable. And so, yes, they could have the votes to do it, but they are going to have to answer to us and respond to why this is necessary. The other thing where we do have the votes is 80% of Marylanders do not want to see tax increases. And if these legislators here want to all of a sudden raise taxes and go against the will of their constituents, then that's going to be up to them. You know, we've said this several times. You know, economic times are tough right now. Family budgets are hard. And all of a sudden the state of Maryland's going to say, oh, well, we can't manage our own state. We're going to go to you and ask us to pay for it. Marylanders do not want to pay for any more state government. And I think that's going to be the big argument that we'll be able to have then, and hopefully be successful with that.
How is it that we're hearing about the additional cost of Medicaid and people are coming into the hospitals sicker than they ever have before? Are other states dealing with this as well?
You're exactly right. And that's what we were saying, too, when the Senate president had mentioned all of these different ailments and reasons why that's going on. Those same things are happening in every state. So Maryland is not unique to that. The problem is Maryland has lowered the bar to be on Medicaid. And one of the big questions that we have brought about is we've put in the health benefit exchange many years ago. That has been very successful. I mean, we want everyone to have health insurance. But at the same time, those that can pay for it should go on the exchange and pay for it. Maryland ranks one of the highest in the states. Over 22% of our population is on Medicaid. That's nothing to be proud of. No, we have to find a way to get that number lower.
Switching gears a little bit, I know last session was dominated by the conversations about juvenile crime. The policy changes took effect in November. Are you satisfied with what the General Assembly did, and do you believe that the changes are really going to make an improvement in the numbers that we're seeing?
You know, what's interesting is last year when we got together, we talked about what was the number one issue was crime and public safety. And that's not this year. You know, so there has been some improvements. You know, I listened to the mayor and the governor the other day talk about some of the improvements they've seen in Baltimore City. They did a very difficult time of trying not to show accolades to State's Attorney Ivan Bates. I saw Ivan Bates as we came into session yesterday and thanked him. Because what he is finally doing is holding criminals accountable. And he is putting people in jail. He's incarcerating people. And that message is getting out into the streets. And I think that's what's made the biggest difference.
All right. We've got a lot of work to do on the budget. Look forward to more conversations. Thank you for joining us this evening. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Fox 45 News will keep a close eye on how state lawmakers address juvenile justice this session. The head of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee will join us to talk more about that right after this. We're live in Annapolis for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth as lawmakers look to tackle several issues during this session, including some of the concerns surrounding juvenile crime. Joining us now is State Senator and Judicial Proceedings Committee Chairman Will Smith. Senator Smith, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Last year, we know that this session was dominated by juvenile crime. The policies that you and your colleagues adopted and the governor signed into law, most of them took effect November 1st. Do you believe that what we saw will really implement some changes when it comes to juvenile crime across the state?
No, I think we took some significant steps last session to address that issue. It's going to take time for that to play out and be fully implemented. Now we're in the phase of oversight and implementation. So I think we did critical work last session. Let's see how things play out. It just got implemented this last fall, so you know we've got a couple of months to see how these things play out.
We still are seeing some instances of high-profile, brutal attacks involving young people. Do you believe that there's anything else that can be done to ensure that parents and these young people know that their actions will have consequences?
Sure. Everyone should know, I mean, all of your viewers should know that public safety is our top priority, and that the legislation and the good work that we did last session was aimed and directed all towards making sure that we keep Marylanders safe. Now, the measures we put in place are slowly being implemented. Right now, what we're focused on, and we're going to have a hearing later on this session next week to provide some oversight and see how those things are going, and to make sure that we have some significant metrics to understand what DJS, the Department of Juvenile Services, is doing to make sure that they're holding not only the youths accountable, but also that the systems and the services that they're providing to those youths are being held accountable too, and we actually have some metrics to understand what's happening.
Yeah, we just saw this juvenile DJS report, the Department of Juvenile Services, an evaluation that was done looking at the programs that are in place. There's some significant concerns or gaps in how these programs are being assessed. What more can you do to ensure that DJS is making sure that the programs in place are producing the results, are providing the level of services that are necessary?
So one of the things, I mean, those are the questions we're going to be asking next week, and I hope you tune in to that hearing. One of those things we can do is ensure if there are new policies that need to be passed next year or this year, but one of the things we have right before us now is the budget. And so we'll use that as a tool to ensure that, that the right resources are there. Also, leadership. We have to hold the leadership of that department accountable. We are, this is a massive enterprise. It takes a long time to turn that ship. But we are now in the second year of this endeavor, of this administration, and it's to the point where we're going to have to take a hard look at what the department is doing and some of the results that it's producing.
If leadership is really the next step in making sure that the policies that you all have enacted are being implemented appropriately, do the people of Maryland have time to wait for that ship to turn with the current leadership, or is it time to reevaluate? Who's at the top?
I think we're at a continuous evaluation stage. That's why we're here. Part of our role is that oversight stage. So, look, I applaud a lot of what this secretary has done, taken a department and taken several steps and produced some significant metrics forward. So I applaud the progress that's been made. It's never enough, so we are going to continue our oversight role in that regard.
Before session started, there had been some calls from Republicans to replace DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi. Do you share those same concerns and that wish?
No, I'm not ready to come out and say that publicly just yet. I know Secretary Schiraldi. I'm familiar with his work. I am pleased with what he's done. We have so much more to do, and so part of what we're going to be doing next week and looking into this report that was recently published is understanding where we need to go next, where we are, and some of the next steps we can take this session.
Talking to the people of Maryland who may still be concerned, we just saw, someone in Baltimore City, a gentleman who was attacked with a metal pipe. He has permanent eye damage from an incident involving young people. He just sent a letter to the governor as well as the mayor of the city calling for more changes. What do you say to him and other people who are still frustrated about what they're experiencing when it comes to juvenile crime?
I say, look, your legislators down here in Annapolis take that very seriously. Public safety is our #1 priority. We have passed significant landmark legislation to ensure that that department is held accountable and that the services are delivered and that the people that are involved in the justice system are also held accountable. We will continue that hard work, and that work in our committee starts next week with this legislative oversight hearing.
When you talk about using the budget as a way to ensure oversight, what exactly does that look like?
Reallocation of resources, more resources where they're needed. There are a number of tools you can use. That in conjunction with obviously holding leadership accountable. That's what we do.
Other states' attorneys have been concerned about changes to automatic charging of young people. I think you and I talked about this on the last day of session last year. Do you think that plan proposal will move forward this year? Is there appetite to change where the juvenile cases start? What
we have to do first is ensure that DJS, the Department of Juvenile Services, is operating optimally before we can feed it more responsibility and work. Once that happens, then I think we can move forward with that reform. I am a huge proponent of that reform, but I also understand that we have to make sure that we can fully implement what we've got in place first before we can take the next steps. Look, in Maryland, in Baltimore City, for instance, it represents 9% of the population of the state of Maryland, but it's 40% of the prison population. In Maryland, African Americans represent 30% of the population, but 70% of our prison population. So I don't think anyone's satisfied with that status quo either. For us to move forward with this level of reform, we've got to make sure that the reforms we've got in place and that the Department of Juvenile Services is operating at optimal capacity before we feed it more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so next week we'll see what that hearing brings, and we'll keep our eyes on that. Senator Smith, I appreciate your time today. Look forward to watching how the committee unfolds and everything that comes out of the work.
Likewise.
That's all for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth, live from Annapolis. I'm Mikenzie Frost.